Villagers of the Greek island of Lesbos came home to a scene of destruction Monday after a powerful 6.3 magnitude earthquake hit the island and the western coast of Turkey, leaving one woman dead. The epicenter of the quake was about 52 miles northwest of Turkey's coastal city of Izmir, but the quake was felt as far away as Athens. Lesbos suffered some of the worst damage. The island was at the center of the migration crisis 2 years ago. Officials say about 10 people on the island were injured. Small earthquakes are common in the region, but experts say anything higher than 5.5 is rare.
Downpours have swept across much of central and east China, causing flash floods across many regions. In central China's Hunan province, floodwaters brought by a downpour started early Sunday and drenched 35 houses. Evacuated residents were forced to move to a makeshift shelter on Sunday night. In East China's Zhejiang province, the rain-triggered floods on Monday washed away the road bays and caused the collapse of several sections of a local main road. In East China's Jiangxi province, extreme floodwaters toppled a 30-year-old pine tree in a downtown neighborhood of the provincial capital of Nanchang, knocking down a house and injuring an elderly resident trapped inside. And Typhoon Merbok has made landfall in South China's Guangdong province. Heavy rain and gales with speeds reaching 27 meters per second have swept through the region. Now, rain is still expected for the region for the next 2 days, and local officials say the province is vulnerable as parts had already been lashed by a round of heavy rainfall earlier this month.
A desperate rescue operation is underway after this 7-story building collapsed in Kenya. At least 15 people are missing. The authorities say they'd asked the occupants to leave before the building came down in the eastern suburb of the capital, Nairobi. It collapsed overnight during heavy rainfall. A specialized team from the Kenyan Defense Force has been called in to help search through the rubble. There have been recent and similar building collapses in Kenya. 49 people died last year when another building collapsed during heavy rain in the early hours in a poor neighborhood of Nairobi.
Have you had a chance to see this tornado yet? This was from yesterday in Carpenter, Wyoming. A lot of storm chasers out there. A lot of people had eyes on it. Look at that condensation funnel. It's so perfectly visible. You can see the power flashes. A really violent tornado there down at the base. There was one person injured in Wyoming from the severe weather and also just some huge hail. You can see a lot of golf balls falling there, maybe even a few baseballs in the mix. And this whole storm system is just moving toward the east. So we're going to have more of this stuff over the next couple of days.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and opposition leader Isaac Herzog have just held a clandestine meeting with Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. After reports of this meeting came out in Haaretz today, Herzog confirmed the meeting to Army radio, although he's declining to discuss details of the meeting. Herzog saying that the meeting was part of a process that yielded a document that would have changed the face of the Middle East. In exchange for Israeli territorial concessions in Area C, Arab states were reportedly willing to normalize relations with Israel.
A Saudi has never appeared on Israel's Channel 2 until now. The commentator reiterated the Saudi accusation that Qatar supports terrorism just days after Saudi Arabia led a blockade against Qatar. The Gulf crisis is getting a lot of media attention in Israel, and the Israeli government has been coming out on Saudi Arabia's side. In the immediate aftermath, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Arab states were finally seeing that Israel was not the enemy.
There
is a significant change in the relationship of states and the region with Israel. They see us as a partner and not an enemy in the joint war against Islamic radicalism.
Israel's Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman couched the crisis as an opportunity, saying that peace talks that had been stuck for decades could now be shifting, and that Israel, the Palestinians and the Arab world could be closer to an agreement than ever before. After the US president met with Saudi and Israeli leaders in the Middle East last month, there were reports of moves already underway to normalise ties between Israel, Saudi Arabia, the UAE and the US. And Donald Trump announced he was going to come up with the ultimate deal to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. At the center of this mutual and very public show of support is Hamas. Israel has always called it a terror group, but what's changed is that Saudi Arabia is now calling on Qatar to sever its ties with the Palestinian Resistance Organization.
You do have a so-called Sunni Arab alliance led by Saudi Arabia, which has been willing to collaborate with Israel and is eager to normalize relations with Israel. We've seen the Saudis moving ever more openly in public with their relations with Israel, but the Palestinian issue stands in the way of that. Of course, Qatar also has played a role in normalizing Arab relations with Israel. But the difference with Qatar is that Qatar has also played the other side by continuing to support Hamas and the Palestinians generally.
As the blockade against Qatar by Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries starts to bite, 5 Iranian planes filled with food have landed at Doha Airport. Iran said the planes were filled with vegetables. According to the semi-official Tasnim news agency, the country plans to send 100 tons of fresh fruit and legumes every day to the import-dependent nation. Iran Air spokesman Shahrokh Nuzhabadi told the Agence France-Presse news agency Sunday, so far 5 planes carrying vegetables have been sent to Qatar, each carrying around 90 tons of cargo, while another plane will be sent today.
It's business as usual in food stores and supermarkets across Qatar. The panic buying sprees witnessed last week following the announcement of a blockade on Qatar by some of its neighbors are gone.
Yeah, there was a couple of days where there was no fresh milk, but fresh milk's back on the shelves. Everything seems as normal. Not a problem.
On the shelves, Turkish goods have replaced Saudi products, which this country had for a long time depended on. Signs in supermarkets encourage shoppers to buy local produce and goods to support local farmers and industries. But the emphasis so far has been on airlifting supplies, mainly from Turkey, to avoid shortages.
We begin today with news. The U.S. taxpayer-backed Afghan government is reportedly funding hospitals and schools run by the Taliban. RT's Natasha Sweet looks into a newly released report revealing shocking allegations. According to a BBC reporter who was granted rare access into the Helmand province, the Taliban are trying to set up a mini-state, if not an actual state there, while the hospitals and schools funded by the government are being run by the Taliban. And while the militants own 64% or 9 of the 14 districts of the opium-rich Helmand province, the drugs aren't the only source of funding for the radicals. According to media reports, over the past decade, Afghanistan has received more than $100 billion in international aid, and most of it is reportedly from U.S. taxpayer dollars. The video reveals the degree of isolation the people are facing. And the schools once burned down by the Taliban, now run by them, are teaching kids your average math and science as well as religious studies. Radical Sharia law was implemented while the Taliban ruled the Helmand province in the late 90s, but they were overthrown in 2001 after the U.S.-led coalition responded to the 9/11 attacks. However, in the past 2 years since Western troops withdrew, the Taliban have gained tremendous ground. The reporter alleges things are looking more like they did during the height of Sharia law, not seeing women out in public, and extreme isolation, even banning televisions and movies. Well, this is in wake of the loss of many U.S. soldiers, including the 3 who died this past weekend in Afghanistan.
U.S. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis says he was shocked by the state of military readiness to fight due to years of budget caps. Mattis slammed Congress for confronting budget challenges, saying it has sidelined itself from its active constitutional oversight role by blocking new programs and preventing service growth that place troops at greater risk. Mattis urged lawmakers to approve U.S. President's proposed Army budget for the 2018 fiscal year, which is $639 billion. Meanwhile, Republicans are seeking $30 million more to be added to the budget, but Democrats are worried about where the extra funding will come from, given the Trump administration's pressure to cut taxes.
a crude device filled with nails. These are the remains of a package that exploded at one of South Korea's top universities Tuesday morning, injuring a member of staff and sending police into high alert. It happened at Yonsei University in central Seoul. Police say the package was left in a shopping bag outside an office, and when a faculty member opened it, the blast went off, burning his arm. Security on campus has been tight since.
I was a little surprised, but I thought it wasn't a big deal. Then I heard it could be a terror attack, so now I am a bit scared.
Officials say the injured man was the only person in the office at the time of the blast. No one else is believed to be hurt. Police are now analyzing the package remains. Security footage is being scanned for clues as to who may have planted it and why.
The South Korean military has retrieved hundreds of photos from a suspected North Korean drone found last week near the inter-Korean border. The unmanned aerial vehicle was equipped with a Sony-made camera with a 64GB memory chip. Stored on the chip were 10 photos of the U.S. missile defense system THAAD, stationed some 270 kilometers from the inter-Korean border. This is the first time a drone has been used to take pictures of the THAAD site. Officials say the drone flew at an altitude of under 3 kilometers, and while the resolution of the photos are low, if enlarged, they do show 2 THAAD launchers and its radar. The drone is believed to have been sent out on its mission not long after THAAD was deployed on April 26th, but it fell to the ground on the way back after it ran out of power. Military experts say that the South Korean government needs to come up with efficient countermeasures to deal with the drone problem, which poses a grave threat to the country.
North Korea's drones are small, so they're hard to detect with their existing radar. And if loaded with chemical weapons or explosives, they could be deadly.
The nuclear agency has warned of North Korea's evolving nuclear program and vowed to bolster its capability to analyze the regime's atomic developments. Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Yukiya Amano, says the nature of Pyongyang's nuclear threat has reached a different stage. He said the IAEA, which reports directly to the UN Security Council, would take measures to better understand and monitor North Korea's nuclear development.
United States Defense Secretary Jim Mattis said on Monday that North Korea's advancing missile and nuclear programs are the most urgent threat to American national security. He also said the country's means to deliver them had increased in speed and scope. Earlier this month, the United Nations Security Council expanded targeted sanctions against North Korea after its repeated missile tests. The move was the first such resolution agreed to by the United States and China since President Donald Trump took office.
The administration is reportedly pressuring China to take punitive action against 10 Chinese entities doing business with North Korea. According to the Wall Street Journal, if China does not punish those firms and individuals by the end of this summer, the US is planning to take matters into its own hands by imposing unilateral sanctions. The US fears the Chinese entities are helping the regime to develop a nuclear-tipped ballistic missile that can reach the US mainland.
Senators reached a bipartisan agreement Monday on a possible new round of US sanctions against Russia. Leaders of the Foreign Relations and Banking Committees negotiated the deal, a response to Russia's involvement in the 2016 US presidential election as well as wars in Syria and Ukraine. If approved, new sanctions would be placed on Russians who supply weapons to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's regime, violate human rights, or conduct cyber activity for the government. The deal also tightens existing sanctions against Russia, including ones former President Barack Obama imposed against Russian diplomats living in the U.S. President Donald Trump previously said he'd consider relaxing sanctions against Russia if it helped the U.S. fight terrorism. But this new agreement would make it more difficult for Trump to do that. The deal requires a congressional review of any changes to Russian sanctions. Now, these sanctions aren't a done deal yet. The proposal is tacked on as an amendment to a bill about sanctions on Iran. The bill and its amendment need approval from the full Senate and the House of Representatives before heading to Trump's desk for final approval.
In Russia, more than 650 people have been arrested in nationwide anti-corruption rallies. An unsanctioned protest was held in central Moscow during national holiday celebrations.
Putin is a thief. This is one of the slogans shouted at the protest in central Moscow. Thousands of people chose the day of Russia national holiday to show their discontent with the government. People of all ages, from students to pensioners, say they want an end to what they call a corrupt system of rule overseen by Vladimir Putin. an allegation that the Kremlin dismisses as untrue.
This protest comes after Alexei Navalny's anti-corruption fund published a video in which it alleged that Russia's Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev amassed luxurious mansions and yachts while in office.
Police in Moscow detained hundreds of people at the protest. Opposition leader Alexei Navalny was also detained as he tried to leave his home ahead of the rally.
Corruption is one of the most important problems in Russia. It's a complex problem, and it destroys other aspects of life, like education and medicine.
Similar protests took place in many other cities across Russia. In Vladivostok, over 1,000 demonstrators waved Russian flags and chanted, "Medvedev must resign."
Close to 20,000 Orthodox Jews gather on Sunday at the Barclays Center basketball arena in Brooklyn to protest an Israeli law drafting ultra-Orthodox Jews into the IDF. Rabbi David Niederma, who acts as a liaison for the Central Rabbinic Congress, was quoted as saying, quote, "Since 1948, when the government was founded, they understood that there is such a thing as yeshiva students who are studying and they are exempt of military services," end quote. But for the past few years, Israeli politicians have been trying to tighten the screws and basically forcefully recruiting and forcefully bringing them in for military service, to which they object, he continued. The rally was led by members of the anti-Zionist Satmar Hasidic group and took place almost entirely in Yiddish. Throughout the event, speakers often referred to the government's attempt to draft ultra-Orthodox Jews as religious persecution. Prior to the event, organizers began touring New York City in trucks with large displays promoting the cause. In addition to that, they published a video online showing Orthodox Jews being beaten and arrested by Israeli police. In Israel, military conscription is mandatory for the country's Jewish, Druze, and Circassian citizens. Ultra-Orthodox Jews, however, have traditionally been given exemptions to study Jewish theology. Ever since the draft was first instituted in 1949, all Orthodox Jews have had to do to avoid conscription is to go to the draft office and fill out a yeshiva study deferral form. Most ultra-Orthodox Jews never serve in the military via this method.
Theresa May's future as Prime Minister now lies in this woman's hands. The Northern Irish DUP leader is set to hash out a plan with May to forge an informal alliance, without which the Conservative Party won't be able to govern.
We've had a positive engagement with the Conservative Party. Those discussions continue, and we will be meeting with the Prime Minister as well.
The DUP's ultra-conservative views on issues like abortion and homosexuality mean the coalition is controversial. But their 10 MPs would give the Conservative Party just enough seats to form a government. However, Theresa May still has a way to go to shore up her fragile position. Facing her party on Monday for the first time since their shock defeat, she took the blame and said she'd get it out of the mess. But doubts remain across the board. May's aim in going to the polls was to strengthen her hand in Brexit negotiation talks. But with her majority reduced, opposition parties say she doesn't have the mandate.
Prime Minister went to the country and said, strengthen my hand to drive a hard Brexit, and, not to put too fine a point on it, the country kind of told her where to go.
The government's presentation of its programme is due next Monday, the same day that talks with the EU are planned to start. Both now look likely to be delayed.
Muslims in the Italian city of Florence attend Friday prayers. Florence has only 3 mosques for 15,000 Muslims. They need another one. But before the Muslim community can even start raising funds, it needs to find a location with the help of Florence's City Hall. Since talks of the need for a new mosque began 10 years ago, several locations have been considered. But due to a number of hurdles, nothing came out of it. And the Muslim community is still looking for a suitable place that city officials would agree to. Negotiations failed for an agricultural land, a former bus warehouse, and an ex-army barrack. The imam and city officials will continue to negotiate, but El Zir says it's only a matter of time.
We're confident that if we don't have a place today, we'll have it tomorrow.
Another federal appeals court has ruled against President Donald Trump's revised executive order on immigration.
On Monday, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in San Francisco largely upheld a Hawaii judge's decision to block the measure, which would limit travel from 6 Muslim-majority countries. The ruling said by issuing the order, Trump exceeded the scope of the authority delegated to him by Congress. The president has insisted a travel ban is necessary to protect national security and thwart possible terrorist attacks. But both critics and previous court rulings say the order unfairly targets Muslims, and they've pointed to Trump's own words as evidence. The White House has asked the Supreme Court to intervene and reinstate the measure.
A new edgy production of Julius Caesar is a little too close to home for some fans of the White House. Sponsorship of the Public Theatre's version of Julius Caesar has been pulled by Delta Airlines and Bank of America. The play portrays a Donald Trump-like dictator in a business suit with a long tie who gets knifed to death on the stage. Saying in a statement that it stands completely behind the production on Monday, the public refused to back down. It noted that its staging has provoked heated discussion, but it says that such discussion is exactly the goal of our civically engaged theatre. This discourse is the basis of a healthy democracy.
9/11.
Now, 9/11 was an inside job.
After 2 weeks on air, NBC's newest star, Megyn Kelly, is scheduled to air a sit-down interview with InfoWars host and well-known conspiracy theorist Alex Jones. But immediately after announcing the interview, Kelly and NBC got a lot of backlash for giving Jones a large mainstream platform to voice his opinion.
Sandy Hook.
Well, Sandy Hook's complex because I've had debates where we've devil's advocates said the whole story's true, and then I've had debates where I've said that none of it's true.
Some of Jones' greatest hits include calling Sandy Hook a hoax, claiming the Pulse nightclub shooting was a false flag, and accusing the Obama administration of murdering Antonin Scalia.
The question is, was Anthony Scalia murdered?
One mother who lost a child in the Sandy Hook shooting sent out several tweets in response to the interview. One with a picture of her daughter, asking, "Stare at this and tell me it's worth it." In response to the backlash from Jones' upcoming interview, Kelly tweeted, "Many don't know him. Our job is to shine a light." NBC has yet to publicly comment on the upcoming broadcast.
The search for alien life continues, and one astronomer predicts that the effort could start producing evidence in a decade or so. However, the kind of aliens found will probably not be sort that can dazzle us with their scientific achievements or tales about living in some far-off galaxy. Researcher Chris Impey, in an interview with Futurism, said, "I put my money on detecting microbial life in 10 to 15 years, but not at all detecting intelligent life. That doesn't mean the simple forms discovered will be lacking in excitement and learning opportunities. Whatever is found could provide insights into the sorts of atmospheric conditions conducive to supporting living things. That in turn may aid in the search for celestial bodies that are most likely to serve as hosts." Impey says a number of promising candidates are actually quite close by. He believes that Mars continues to hold promise, as does Jupiter's watery moon Europa. Impey also notes that the James Webb Telescope will provide us greater opportunity to search for what or who else is out there.